Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Montgomery County Taxpayers League this evening. My name is Esther Wells, and I am the president of the Montgomery County Taxpayers League. And we are here joined today with Brian Hull, the MCPS Chief Operating Officer. Also joining me is Josh Montgomery, the Vice President of Montgomery County Taxpayers League, Gordon Brenny, our treasurer, and our board members are Ann Hingston, Joan Fiddler, and Lee Henry. Please check out our website at www.mctaxpayersleague.org or follow us on social media on Facebook, MCTL, on Twitter at MoCo Taxpayers, or you can email me directly at presidentmctl@gmail.com. The objective of the Montgomery County Taxpayers League is to educate and advocate for county taxpayers. We support appropriate actions to achieve greater efficiency and effectiveness in Montgomery County government and tax equity for Montgomery County taxpayers. Our vision is focused on performance and outcome. We host presentations like this with local elected and appointed officials on topics which have an impact on the county's finances and consequently our taxes. We also take part in various public meetings and other advocacy. Please mark your calendar for next month, January 25th at 7 p.m. The Montgomery County Taxpayers League will be meeting with Mark Elrich, the county executive, to discuss upcoming FY 2025 operating budget and community questions. Also, if you are interested in joining MCTL, we have open leadership positions and volunteer opportunities, so please get engaged. Or you can reach out to me or other board members should you be aware of community events and opportunities for us to attend and advocate for members and taxpayers. So with that, I would like to welcome Mr. Hull. Thank you for joining us this evening to discuss your office and role at MCPS and answering questions submitted from the community. We hope this meeting is the first of many conversations and engagement.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having us tonight. My name is Brian Hull. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Montgomery County Public Schools. I've been with the district for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I was with Minneapolis Public Schools and before that with Nashville Public Schools. So spent most of my adult life in public education, first as a teacher and later as an administrator and Chief Operating Officer. So I want to take just a second to introduce and thank the team who is here. We have Mr. Rob Riley, our Associate Superintendent of Finance, Mr. Tom Klossing, the Executive Director of Finance, and Ms. Alfonso Windsor, our Director of Budgeting. So if we want to pull up let me tell you a little bit more about the rest of the office as well first. So I'm one of two deputy superintendents with the school system. And so I oversee our chief of district operations and all of the operations, which includes transportation, food service, safety, the warehouse, print shop, other operational functions of the school system, as well as Mr. Riley, the team here in the finance office, and the human resources function. So the chief officer of human resources in that department, as well as our facilities, our associate superintendent, Seth Adams, over all of our facilities. So that's the team. We oversee, kind of half of the district with the other half under the deputy superintendent with schools and academic departments. And so if we want to pull up the slideshow, we can jump right in. This should only take a few minutes, and then I'm happy to answer whatever questions we have. All right, so if we can go to the next slide. So for the current school year, as you can see in the bottom right corner here, the school district's operating budget is about $3.2 billion. We are the largest school system in the state of Maryland. We are the 14th largest school system in the United States. So we naturally have the largest budget of any school district in the state of Maryland. When you break it down on a per student level, we're in a much more comparable place with some of our other districts, such as Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Prince George, Howard, etc. But because of our size and the number of students we serve, we do have the largest budget in the state. So I brought this chart to kind of show how our funds are at a very high level distributed. So 80% of them or about $2.5 billion, goes directly to our schools. The other 20% is about $631.5 million goes to district provided services such as transportation, technology, central office, and those types of functions. And so it's just important to note that, the money does sit where you would expect it to, which is in the schoolhouse. If we can go to the next slide, there's a bit of a breakdown of how each of these two larger buckets are divided. So this is the 80%, the $2.5 billion. The vast majority, well, the largest portion of that, I should say, goes to our elementary schools. And that's because we have more elementary schools. We have more students in elementary schools. It has, the largest number of grades in them. So there's more staff in those schools. Middle school, of course, is the opposite. It's only 3 grades. We have fewer of them than we do elementary schools. And so the expenditures there are less. High schools, again, we ramp up 4 grades. Obviously, there's, a lot more athletics and specialty programs, including things like CTE in the high schools that require additional resources. Then our special education services. So we here in Montgomery County have a wonderful special education department and services for our students, but that of course comes at a cost, and so that is another large investment that we make each year. Other district services to students, so this would include things like social emotional supports and other types of supports that we provide to all of our students. EML is emergent multilingual, so those are our students who are still learning English. They don't speak English as a first language. So obviously, if you don't speak English as your first language, you're going to need a little extra support to get caught up and get on grade level. And so we provide additional resources there. Maintenance is directly in the schools, obviously fixing the HVAC issues that you hear about and all of the other challenges that you have when you have 211 schools, some of them, getting up there in years. Food service is a big one. The food service fund is an enterprise fund, so it's fully self-supporting. The revenue comes from meals sold and then reimbursements from the federal government. And so that is a self-sustaining fund. The early childhood programs, this is something that we're expanding. We heard a lot about it actually yesterday at yesterday's board meeting, a lot of interest around expanding pre-K, but that is literally adding an additional grade to the school system. And so that takes time, it takes money, and it's important that we do it intentionally and do it right. And then finally, some of our alternative programs, including the Montgomery Virtual Academy. So if we could go to the next page. So that's the bucket, the $2.5 billion or 80% of the budget that sits in our schools. So what about this other $631.5 million? Obviously, also a large amount of money. What does that go for? Well, the largest portion is for transportation. Obviously, we are a large county, and so we have 1,200 buses that run every morning, 1,200 buses that run every afternoon. Our buses actually travel over 100,000 miles every single day. To put that in perspective, that would be the same as going around the Earth at the equator about 4.5 times every single day. So it's just a massive operation getting we transport over 100,000 students. So out of the 160 plus that we have, we transport over 100,000 of those every single day. The next largest, as you might expect, is academics and other supports. So while these are not budgeted in the schools, obviously providing support directly for the schools, maintenance, technology, again, things that are directly supporting our schools and our students. And then we get the mental health supports, utilities, safety facility. And it's not till you get pretty far over to the right here with some of these smaller bars like human resources, materials management, finance, leadership, that you're talking about the central office functions. And we do have one of the smallest central office functions of any district in the state of Maryland, and I believe we've got a slide on that coming up as well. So we can move along. So when we talk about our funding, this is kind of what I was talking about before. When you look at the funding on a per pupil level as opposed to the entire district, obviously we've got a huge budget because we're the 14th largest district in the country out of like 5,000 school districts. So the district is large. When you break it down on a per pupil level, it allows you to compare across districts and across states to get a sense of how we're funded compared to other districts. It of course doesn't take into consideration cost of living. So obviously I lived in Minneapolis and Nashville, as I mentioned. Cost of living much lower there. So as you would expect, spending in the large urban and coastal areas is significantly higher than in some smaller, less populated areas of the country. So what this graph shows, the top blue line is our budget since the turn of the century. So as you can see, pretty steady, healthy increases, with maybe the exception of kind of that 09 to 16 timeframe where public education spending across the country really froze coming out of the recession. And in many ways still has not recovered. But you see, more or less before then and after then, an investment in our schools, a growing budget, just as our population grows. The bottom line is adjusted for inflation. And so that really represents the actual purchasing power of the school district. As we all know, especially over the past 3 years with inflation running as high as it's been, $100 today does not buy what $100 10 years ago bought. And it's going to be different 10 years and 20 years from now. So it's important to look at how our funding is when you adjust for inflation, because that really represents what we can buy. Obviously, our teachers get raises most years, and the cost of fuel and food and everything continues to rise. So when we look at that, it's a very different picture. It really, as you can see, if you look at the 2009, funded at about $11,295 per student, and today funded at $11,135. We're actually funded at a lower level today per student than we were 15 years ago. And so there's many reasons for that, but I think people get confused when they see an ever increasing budget thinking, wow, how many resources do we have to pour into this school system? But when you adjust for inflation, as we all do in our real lives, it's a very different picture. And obviously the population that we serve has changed significantly since 2009. Much more diverse county, many more students learning English, and the impacts that COVID has had on our young people is astounding. As I mentioned, I've spent my entire adult life in education. I have never seen our young people struggle as they do today. And so really looking at what we can and need to provide around additional resources, be it food, mental health supports, safety in our schools. So we really are serving a lot more and doing it on, pretty flat funding. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is the administrative costs, as I mentioned earlier. And so this is determined by the state of Maryland, their reporting category. So every school district in the state has the same reporting categories, and that's obviously so that the state can make comparisons across school districts and have an apples to apples comparison, because once you start comparing one state to another, they all report things differently, and it just becomes a very apples to oranges comparison. And so in the state of Maryland, as you can see, aside from Howard County, of the large school districts in the state of Maryland, we have the smallest percentage of our funding going to central office. About 2 cents on every dollar that's invested in the school system goes to the central office. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, I'm not going to read through all of these, but just some examples. We heard a lot from the county council last year about transparency and oversight, and there's a ton of oversight. We've got our school board, our county council, the Maryland State Department of Education. We've got our internal audit function that reports to the board. We do an annual external audit. MSDE, the State Department of Education, does audits. The legislative oversight. We also, the Office of the Inspector General. I know one of the questions that was submitted was about having an internal Office of Inspector General in the school system. Well, the county council, right before COVID, actually passed legislation giving the counties Office of the Inspector General oversight of the school system as well. And through the budget last year, MCPS got a large increase. They also added 2 investigators to the OIG's office specifically to look at Montgomery County Public Schools. And that has actually been very helpful to us as we have struggled with many of the things that you've seen in the news this school year. Having someone that can come in with an objective set of eyes and really take a look at our processes and our procedures and tell us where we need to be making improvements. So that's just, a few of the things that we do and how we're accountable both to the county and the state, and most importantly, to our taxpayers and our communities. So I believe that's the last slide we have. And so happy to answer any questions that you have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And definitely that last slide is very telling, right, of all the various bodies that are in place to provide that oversight. And so that's definitely a great segue into some of the thoughts that have been on community members' minds. But maybe we'll start with, you showed the budget, the 80%, the 20% between school and district. Can you help us understand for the maintenance of effort, MOE? Our understanding is that it is calculates spending based on enrollments of the prior September. Can you please clarify why MCPS recommended last year or the current year's budget FY24 that was greater than the council's maintenance of effort based on spending affordability limit for MCPS of about $2.7 billion? And then maybe talk about then what that means for this upcoming FY25 operating budget and thoughts that you guys are having in terms of what level is needed for the FY25 operating budget.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that question. So the MOE is a state law, but it actually stems from a federal law. When the federal government started providing funding to states, they wanted to make sure that states weren't going to then reduce their state funding and just simply replace it with the federal funding. They wanted the federal funding to be that layer on top, specifically targeting our neediest communities. And then states followed suit because they didn't want local governments decreasing funding as the state and the federal funding came in. And so it really is not a spending guideline or suggestion. It's just a rule that's in place at both the federal and the state level that ensures that those lower level state and local governments aren't replacing their funding with the state or the federal funding, which is something they call supplanting in because of these rules is not allowed. But the biggest reason is because of the inflation slide that I showed you a few minutes ago. The MOE does not take into account inflation at all. And so you can imagine in a year that we've had recently with 6% or 8% inflation, giving our teachers a 6% raise this past year, things increase in cost. And so if we strictly went by MOE, we would be making significant reductions in services to our students, staff in our schools, to the tune of 6 to 8%, which would be massive. I think you said about $2.7 billion. You're talking about a huge difference, a $500 million difference or more. Did I do that math right? But that's really the reason, is that just to provide the same services next year that we're providing this year costs more. And so that's the answer to that. What we're looking at in this coming year is certainly a more modest budget request. I think that last year, kind of the whole episode with the school system, the county government, just wore everybody out. And so we are going to be looking at a much more modest request. However, it's still going to be significant because the largest piece of that, again, is the compensation for our employees. And what we agreed to last year was a 3% increase on July 1 of 2024, which is the same increase that the county government is giving their employees. This is 3%. And that for the school system costs $100 million. And so before we even get off go, just to meet these contractual agreements and keep pace with other counties, other districts, we're at $100 million. Then we've got the added challenge this year in particular of all of these federal COVID funds going away. So we have $130 million in federal ESSER funds budgeted this year that we will not have next year. And so we have no illusion of bringing all of that back, but there are some pieces, specifically our social workers, counselors, and things like that we know are such a need for our young people right now. So a small portion of that will be coming back. And then again, there's the inflationary costs. And so, you know, it's not going to be, I think, what many people would like to consider as modest, frankly, not what I would like to be submitting. But there will not be new programs. There's not going to be, you know, large amounts of additional spending. It really is focusing on what are we required to do through the state of Maryland's blueprint laws. There's, you know, some specific requirements in there that cost money. What are these essential items that we bring back from the federal funding? And then, of course, first and foremost, meeting our obligation to our employees.
So that's all great and very helpful and insightful information. And so I definitely can follow that train of thought. I know one other follow-up to that, for the amounts that are in excess of MOE, then it sounds like maybe it's not the whole thing, but for some of those items, is there a way to, we could have transparency be improved by tying them exclusively to lowering the achievement gap? I know you mentioned some of the things that are currently funded by one-time funds, the ESSER funds, that would move to base budget. As a community member, my understanding is that, okay, maintenance of effort is based on the formula, what it would cost to adequately educate a child. You mentioned that, you know, then taking into account inflation and these type of amounts, but anything in excess of that, I would view as an investment, right? Investment in our students. And so with investments, you look at return on investment, right? And so to adequately track the return of that investment, that would require transparency. So maybe can you share some of the ways that MCPS can be more transparent with that added investment layer above MOE that could be linked to something like reducing the achievement gap?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we're here at the end of the day, right? Is to educate our children and specifically to close that achievement gap that has persisted for generations. So if you look at the board presentation from yesterday, there's a couple of slides in there that glean some light into that, you know, specifically, what are these investments on ESSER that we may be bringing back to the operating budget? We've also, if you go back to the Fiscal Management Committee, which was in November, I believe, we laid out there kind of an early look at our FY25 budget ask as far as kind of what I just went through, the compensation piece, the blueprint, the ESSER. And so we really are trying to be more transparent with that stuff this year. And it's not that we haven't wanted to be in the past. It's just can be difficult. You know, if you put out too much information without the right context, it can be confusing or misleading. And so it's important for us to have an opportunity to, you know, get in front of our taxpayers and our citizens and our families and have these types of conversations. But yes, as we work through this budget process, we will be presenting our Board of Education and our County Council with very specific line item increases where we feel the need to add money to the budget. And so, yes, we will be sharing exactly how these additional investments will be used specifically to lower the achievement gap. You know, some of the conversation at the board table yesterday was around the additional supports we put in place for mathematics. So 2 years ago, we invested in a reading specialist in every one of our schools to help train our teachers up. Yeah. We're starting to see gains in reading now. We have not seen those gains in math yet because we just added the additional math supports, you know, 3 months ago at the beginning of this school year. And so we are hoping and expecting to see those gains over the coming years. And we will, you know, continue as we work through these meetings with, again, our board and the county council to make that connection for people and show how these investments are paying off.
Esther, this is Gordy. And Brian, I have a question on this point. Tom will recall that up to 2 years ago, we used to have a single page table that transparently showed how all the increased spending called Table 1A was going to be used. And it specifically spoke to all of the interventions and all the other extra things we're doing to help kids that are not proficient in math and reading. Why was Table 1A discontinued?
So I'll let Mr. Clausen speak to that.
Well, I'm also going to rely on Ms. Ponzo Windsor to help me too. Table 1A for Brian and those that don't recall, because Brian wasn't here at the time, was a one-page summary table that basically showed the starting point being, for example, the FY24 operating budget and the changes, the major changes that are in the budget request for FY 2025. So it's a short one-page summary. And Yvonne, you may have some history or recall when and why we were taking that out. Do you have anything to add on that?
We no longer produce that. That was a leadership decision, above us, obviously, that, 1A wasn't needed because we spell it out in all the chapters, but it's something that can be considered, obviously, moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Gordy. Any questions before we move forward with our next topic?
Yeah, I have a question. Brian, you showed us a very good chart, actually, which showed all the various school systems in Maryland. So do you have any idea as to how many of those school systems have gone over MOE in their budget, let's say last year?
I do not have that information. That is something that I think we could pretty easily find. But from my experience, most school systems go over MOE every single year, again, because not doing so would mean a reduction in services. I think the last time that Montgomery County didn't go over MOE was the 2 or 3 years immediately following the Great Recession. And so every district that I've worked in, which I guess is 3 now, but I've worked with many others. Aside from some rare times like after the Great Recession and some exceptions, obviously, most urban and suburban, certainly school districts, go above MOE almost every year.
Yeah, just to add in, I'm sorry. I think there are a few of the smaller districts near the shore that might be at MOE, and these are the ones that are struggling with the blueprint requirements now, because if they're getting MOE, it makes it even harder to meet blueprint.
Right.
Okay. Any final thoughts, Joan?
No, I just want you to know that I'm the skeptic who, whenever I testified on the school's budget to the council, considered MOE to be a maintenance of emolument.
Thank you.
I appreciate you sharing that.
Yes, and if anyone has any questions, definitely please feel free to raise your hand and I will get to you. So turning a little bit to transportation, this has been, I think at the beginning of this year, we were 100% staffed for transportation. And so thank you very much. I know with my son being in special education, having that reliable bus service every day has been extremely valuable for my family and meeting our needs. And so can you update the community on where are we in the Go Live MCPS transportation app for families and parents?
Yep. So thank you for that question. And I'll just quickly say, no one was more relieved than me that we opened the year 100% staffed, because, we did miss some routes last year, and that was a huge problem, because if we can't get our kids to school, not only can they not learn, but then their parents, many of them, can't go to work, etc. And so making sure that we were staffed up there and actually have some sub drivers on reserve now, because we have, anywhere from 60, 70, 75 call outs on any given day of people who are sick or on vacation. And so if we only had, just enough to cover each route, we'd be missing routes every day. And that's what happened last year. And so we're in a much better place this year. A lot of hard work from both the human resources and our transportation department to get us there. And then the app is one of the other things that we're rolling out. And this is really, frankly, exciting. It's been a bit of a slower process than we thought it was going to be, and it's going to continue to be developed. The portion where parents will be able to get on the app and start tracking where their bus is at will roll out after winter break. And I don't know if we're hoping for a district-wide rollout, but certainly, at least in a limited capacity, it just, again, with 1,200 buses, it's very, very complicated because the same bus doesn't always take the same route. So the bus follows the driver. And so if the driver is pulled from one route to another or has to modify a route, we just have to make sure we don't want parents looking at the app and thinking their kid's being driven up to Clarksburg when they think they're going to the neighborhood school. So just being cautious about getting this right, but we do expect that coming out after winter break. And then, you know, the future of this that we see is the ability to put, I mean, obviously, immediately it will have the ability to track our drivers, monitor speed. Going forward, we're hoping to get to a place over the next couple of years where kids can actually swipe their ID as they get on the bus. And so we know who is on each bus, how full the bus is, to make sure that we're maximizing capacity, making sure that only the kids who are supposed to be on the bus are getting on the bus. And then it's also going to help our drivers with navigation. So right now, we don't have navigation on any of our buses. And so it's great if you've been driving the same route for many years and you know exactly where to go. But if you don't, and you're trying to navigate a school bus in the dark at 6:30 in the morning with a bunch of kids on it, you know, that is far from ideal. So we are really excited about, you know, getting this initial part rolled out, but then really what the capabilities are going to be to improve the student and family experience in the years to come.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That sounds fantastic. And if I can chime in on if it is a systemic rollout, I would advise special education be at the top of the list. I just know that there are so many times where, you know, we are just in that need of getting that peace of mind for our kids, and then elementary school kids as well. One of the features that I think would be helpful that I know currently we do manually with the buses is on the first day of school, we exchange phone numbers with the bus aide and the parents. And so having it, whether it's, you know, anonymous, like that it's going to be a call, but having the bus driver and the bus aide have our parents' phone numbers in case of an emergency, an accident, a delay, anything like that, they can call us so that we can provide that assistance. That I think is great. I've used it with the bus driver where she calls me and I'm able to assist. So that sounds really wonderful. I'm glad that's moving forward, and I'm happy to help advocate for that to be done on a basis that you guys need it. So thank you for that. So then similarly with transportation, electric bus. So as we know, we have been on 100% electrification with transportation. The fleet, MCPS has been a leader in these orders for buses, but that has not been without challenge in terms of supply chain and the vendor being able to procure those requests. So can you talk about what hurdles or challenges, if any, is MCPS facing in getting all approximately 130 buses in the fleet on the road and safely moving kids to school effectively? Have hydrogen buses been considered as an alternative? And when is the next major checkpoint on this decision process before any new RFP for electric buses is released?
All right, I'm just taking some notes here. I want to make sure I answer all of that. So we do have the largest electric bus fleet in the country, which is really exciting. We, you know, as part of our initiative and part of the county's initiative to get to net zero, and obviously something that's very important to our young people. I think that, you know, climate is much more on their minds than it is, you know, for myself. I mean, not that it's not on my mind, but, you know, they know that they're going to have to live with the consequences of what, you know, is going on. And so this is an important endeavor. We have run into some challenges, you know, and any time that you're on the cutting edge or the precipice of a new technology, that's going to happen. And so we were supposed to have 120 fully electric buses delivered to us in August before the school year started. And they weren't. None of them were. And this becomes a huge problem for us operationally because the state of Maryland, you know, has I believe it's a 12-year lifespan on buses before they have to be removed from the road. And so we, you know, refresh our buses every year. One 12th of our fleet. And so not having those buses, we had to go back to the state and ask for an extension on the older buses for 1 year. So that was very problematic. And we've been in conversations with Thomas Built Buses, and then Highland, who is the, sells the Thomas Built, the electric versions of them, is our direct supplier. And what they have started delivering them. I think we've got about 70 to 80 now of the 120, and they continue to trickle in. And so they are getting there, but the whole bus industry has experienced significant, not just supply chain disruptions, but a lot of school systems didn't order that replacement cycle that I was talking about. They put that on pause during COVID when they weren't transporting kids. And so now everyone's trying to catch up. And so demand is higher than it's ever been. And so that's just caused some problems. So we're working again with the manufacturer and the dealer. We actually switched for our next year's order. So again, this year, 120 electric that are slowly trickling in, much to my chagrin. But for next year, we were also planning to order 120 electric buses and just determined we could not take that risk. So we went back to the Board of Education a couple of months ago and said, listen, we're going to need to change this order to 90 diesel buses and 30 electric buses. Also, they don't make the shorter buses in electric yet. And so we need the proper fleet mix, to run our operations. And so we have changed our order for next year. It's now 90 diesel and only 30 electric. And we're looking at our next year order, which would be fiscal year 26, to determine, what we need operationally, what makes sense, diesel versus electric. So we are still committed to transforming to an electric fleet, but we just need to do so in a way that supports our operations. As far as the hydrogen goes, that is an even newer technology that I know is out there, but I've never actually seen or ridden on a hydrogen in any vehicle, frankly, hydrogen vehicle. But what we're going to do is I talk about these challenges and making sure that we're pushing on our suppliers is to put out an RFI, which is a request for information. So put that out publicly this winter. And then various companies, hopefully some that do hydrogen vehicles and certainly others that do electric will, put up there. It's not necessarily a proposal at this point, but submit information on what they could do to support the school system. And then in the spring and that'll kind of give us a lay of the land, what is out there specifically around, is hydrogen really a viable option at this point, or are we still a few years away? And then in the spring, we'll do an RFP, which is a formal request for proposal where these companies will, submit and their proposals and their, costs, and we will pick the one that best suits the needs of the school district and is, most economically responsible to the taxpayers of Montgomery County.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah. And thank you for your commitment to ensuring that you first and foremost, we're able to transport our students to school. And being able to pivot when there are things outside of your control that may hinder the move to electrification, I think it's important to make that call that first and foremost, we will get our students to school and then everything else will follow. So thank you for that. Any comments from anyone before we move forward to talk about tutoring and interventions and ESSER fund uses? Okay.
Sure.
Yes. Please, Janice. Yes, please.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if you got my question that I had, but I had submitted a question asking on the electric buses. First of all, who owns them? That's the first question, because we don't have the public doesn't know who owns the buses. I will note that on the MCPS website, there's a picture of an electric bus and it says Highland on the side. The actual buses on the road do not say anything. So, and Highland isn't a company. So that's my first question. Second question is, there is ongoing litigation over the electric bus procurement, the existing one. It's pretty troubling to see on your budget chart what a big chunk of the budget is transportation. And then to know that when the electric buses were put out for bid, there was some problems with that bidding process, because I was able to find 2 sets of bid documents for the same RFP. The bid review documents were changed. And of course, that has come out in litigation. And there's been no response from the school system or the Board of Ed. There's been no rebidding of that. There's been no discussion of curing that problem. Meanwhile, you're still in litigation over it, which is an added cost that's going on. In the meantime, the supplier for diesel buses in the state was involved, apparently, it appears, in a embezzlement scheme. They're still in business. And the school system has simply gone and run over to Virginia and bought diesel buses over there without any bids. And so I'm concerned about why that would be, that they would simply run over and start buying buses someplace else without putting that out for bid. I understand the response was that it was an emergency, but it really wasn't an emergency. School system knew they were being embezzled by the Annapolis supplier. So that wasn't really a big surprise. And I don't understand why suddenly paying more for diesel buses is now the consequence of all that, when we could have been putting out that RFP again and looking for a supplier of diesel buses that was going to give the school system a competitive price. So I'm just seeing a lot of places here in transportation where it's concerning that those costs could be monitored, and they're not being monitored. And the other thing is, part of the electric bus scheme that the school system supposedly entered into was that it was going to be budget neutral. And the budget neutral part was because partly what the company HET MCPS LLC, which is the actual company they're contracted with the way they had it structured, but also because electricity was going to be sold back to the grid, and then the school system would be getting credit for selling back electricity to the grid. And has that ever happened is the other question, because that was supposed to be an income stream from the electric school buses. So I could really do this all night long, but I will stop right there with those questions.
Oh,
All right. Well, that was a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
I got more.
Who owns the bus first? I'll try to, I was taking notes here, so I'll try to hit all of them. Who owns the bus is Highland. So they buy these buses and then they lease them to the school system. And so we are leasing the buses. We do not own them, which is a difference from the diesel buses. And we'll be continuing to work with Highland on those. As far as the litigation goes, of course, the school
I'm sorry,
board.
can I just stop you? I'm sorry. Can I stop you right there? Highland is not a company. So I'm actually looking for the real company that owns the buses and who's insuring them. There's Highland Transportation, Highland Fleets, HET. There are multiple. So if a kid is hit and killed by a school bus that's electric, who is insuring that school bus? There's my question. Not a general term, but the actual company.
Okay, so that wasn't your initial question, but Highland, and I'm not sure, what their legal name is at the moment. I know that they, the name of the company that is Highland, and so they lease out the buses. The board, of course, does not respond to ongoing litigation, but we feel very confident in, our position and the processes that were followed, and so I don't think that the board has any concerns there. As far as the proper steps were followed in that case. As far as the company, the diesel distributor that you talked about, which I think is ATB, we stopped doing business with them as soon as we found out of what was happening, and so we do not do business with them anymore. When you talk about the Virginia company, so each state has one licensed dealer for each type of bus. So Thomas Built Buses, which is the type of bus we buy, ATB is the vendor in Maryland. That's the only one. So we don't do business with them anymore. So we started doing business with their counterparts in Virginia. And so that's the company that we procured the buses through. Again, did everything that we needed to do to check the boxes as far as Maryland laws and our own procurement policies. The vehicle to grid is something that's still in the works. You know, this is obviously a phased rollout. They're still installing the infrastructure, the charging stations at many of our depots. And so that is still something that we are working with Pepco and with Highland on, but is not yet up and running. So I think I hit most of them there.
Thank you so much for that response, and thank you, Janice, for your question. In interest of time, I did want to get to talking a little bit more about the school to prison pipeline, and referring back to the October 23rd conversation that the Associate Superintendent of the Office of School Support and Wellbeing, Damon Monteleone, responded to Councilmember Mink at the joint E&C Public Safety Committee meeting regarding whether MCPS plans to ask for and add to base in the FY25 operating budget funding necessary to address the OLO's report 2023-6 addressing racial inequity in the school to prison pipeline. And so Mr. Monteleone's response was absolutely. We have social workers unit and restorative justice approach unit on the ESSER. We talked about some of the things that will move off of the ESSER one-time funding onto the base budget. And so can you, what additional resources and how much incremental funding should MCPS ask for to allow for best results and gains in reducing our targeted populations, suspension rate, school to prison pipeline, so our most vulnerable population of students, Black African-American students, can remain in the classroom to focus on their education without disruption? And how does the approach align with the anti-racist audit findings and action plan? What is an adequate measurement of period of time for getting data and evaluating the effectiveness of this investment?
So I'll start, and then I'll open it up to my team if they have additional stuff to add. And then this is one, Damon provided a pretty lengthy response for us, and so we can share that. It sounds like maybe we already have that will provide more details. But, you know, this is something that is a real challenge for us and school systems across the country right now. And as I mentioned earlier, I started in my 20s as a teacher and have been in education ever since. And I've never seen anything like this and it's not just in our schools, right? I mean, the violence is in the community, the drug use, you know, this fentanyl, which, you know, before about 18 months ago, I'd never even heard of, is killing people. And so we are working diligently and hard to try to figure out what the root cause of this is. Obviously, COVID, and the isolation and some of the stresses that put on our families and our students and our young people is part of it. But we are really trying to figure out what that right response is. You've probably heard about the truancy pandemic across the country right now. Coming out of COVID, truancy rates more than doubled across the country. And if we don't have the kids in our schools, not only can we not educate them, but that means they're outside of school doing something probably that they shouldn't be doing. And so this is a community-wide issue that finds its way into our schools in many, many unfortunate forms. And so Damon talked about in his response, some of the mental health responses in my department under security, making sure that we are adding adequate, security, that we have, utilizing technology through the forms of, security cameras, and, whatever else that we can put out there. One of the things that we brought to the board yesterday was emergency alert device, that our schools can use. And I think, after talking to our union partners, they're excited about, that's just going to make everybody feel a little bit safer. But, things like that, vape detectors. So, like a smoke detector. Now these kids have these electronic vaping devices where they can, whether it's nicotine or marijuana, and it doesn't have the same potency or smell apparently. And so we've got these devices that we're putting in our bathrooms, vape detecting. I mean, things that just 5 years ago were unheard of. And so, we're still working on what the right mix of security and restorative justice and mental health supports is. But again, as we talk about, our funding, these are things that just weren't on the radar 5 and 10, let alone, 20, 30 years ago. So it presents a huge challenge. I think Damon was a little bit more specific about some of the costs. Some of the ESSER things, some of the things that are funded with ESSER and have been for the past 3 years, specifically restorative justice, social workers and psychologists, those are things that we are proposing to bring back to the operating budget. And so there will be some, I don't have a hard number for you, but there will be some investments around those pieces because it's just so important.
Thank you for that. And so maybe I will turn to a new topic, one that really it's on my mind. I have a 5th grader, and as we look into middle schools that can support his needs, again, being part of the special education community here, one of the concerns that I have as I attend some of the superintendent's meeting is that with some of the schools, there isn't a thriving PTA. Right. And so the president of PTA has testified saying that, for the year, our school children haven't gone on any field trips, and some schools don't even have a PTA at all. And so what is MCPS as a school system doing to ensure schools without active, thriving PTAs have opportunities to take field trips? So, for example, one of the things that I thought about is that right there in our back doors in DC, we have the Smithsonian museums, which are usually free. All you really need is transportation. And so potentially providing full-time school bus drivers to provide that transportation to these minimal or free opportunities for field trips. And reducing that barrier could really help these schools that are struggling to have an active and thriving PTA. Is there anything you can add to that to really give parents some peace of mind that their children, regardless of school, will be able to have field trips available to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that our board has raised as well. I'll let Rob speak to that, but that really is important because you're right. I mean, we're a very diverse county, but that also means vast inequities across our counties. And so making sure that, all of our students are able to have those enriching experiences.
Thanks, Brian. And so the question was, do PTAs primarily fund? As far as I know, they're coming out of the IAF funds, which are, we charge students for the field trips, and we provide for waivers when that's not available. So as Mr. Hall mentioned, one of the things that we're looking at is to there's a small equity fund, but increase the amount in that equity fund, because we know that there are schools without PTAs and without thriving IAF funds too. Some schools have a large balance in their IAFs, and that's an independent activity fund or student activity fund is what that represents. So just a way to make those opportunities available to students that don't have those resources in their particular schools. So we are looking at making an investment there for equity.
Awesome. And I see, Joan, you've raised your hand. You're on mute. You're on mute, Joan, if you're talking. There you go.
Now? Oh, good. So several years ago, the idea was raised that maybe PTAs in the more high-income schools could partner with PTAs in the lower-income schools. And the reason I say it is because, well, then at that point, my grandchild was in one of the elementary schools, and they had a fundraiser and raised $30,000 for it was some kind of a sports event. And I thought to myself, here's a well-off school making $30,000 off its PTA, and there are schools across the county that have no such advantages. I was told that there was some objection. I'm not quite sure who raised the objection. It was either at the board or the administration that could not be done for some reason. Am I totally off on this? Because I thought that was ideal to have partnerships.
Yeah, and thanks, Ms. Fiddler. So that was the sister school concept, and I came on board after that. But I actually thought that was a good idea. So I'll research that and find out why. I know it was from some of the schools themselves saying that, hey, this is our parents' money. I don't know if there's any regulation that prevents sharing of that. As long as we're transparent to the schools that would be sharing, we couldn't do that without letting the schools that are sharing some of their money, let them know some of their funds will be going to another school. But I can research that further because I had thought that was a good idea. But like I said, it kind of went away before I was in my position.
Yeah.
Okay,
Agree.
thank you.
And so another question regarding testing. Can you explain why MCPS does not fully participate in National Assessment of Education Progress NAEP testing beyond Title I schools? Uniformity in adoption would allow for comparisons with other districts in other states. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so let me turn to the team on that and see. This was one of the ones where I believe we tried to get a response from our Chief Academic Officer. So I'm not sure, Yvonne or Tom or Rob, what we got.
I'm sorry. Can we refer back to the question again? Which one we're talking about?
Yes, so testing. So can you explain why MCPS does not fully participate in the National Assessment of Education Progress NAEP testing beyond Title I schools? Uniformity in adoption would allow for comparisons with other districts in other states.
That's question 8 on our list. Do you want to take a stab at it, or I could read the answer that we got from our Chief Academic Officer?
I think because this is testing, go ahead and read it, I think.
All right. Again, we're finance and operations people, but our Chief Academic Officer said MCPS does not identify schools for participation in the NAEP assessment. We are told which schools were identified, and then she gave us a link to the sampling at the NAEP website that we could share with you after this meeting.
So it sounds like I think it's a private company that does this testing all across the state or country, and it is, great because it allows comparisons across states, which otherwise would be really difficult because each state has its own standardized test. But it sounds like the company itself is the one who does the random sampling and selects the schools.
Correct.
Yes, and I was just reviewing their website, and that's exactly correct. They select the schools based on certain criteria that like designated areas and so on. So it's based on the company's decision.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. And then turning to school improvement. So a year ago, the board asked what happens to chronically failing schools. Is there any update on this request? What accommodations or equity reallocations, such as assigning high-performing principals, extra assistant principals, and authority to recruit and retain the high-performing teachers, giving more autonomy over their budget in return for better academic results? Could innovation funds be established that would award grants to principals above and beyond formula allocations to innovatively reduce the achievement gap?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that we're really focused on. What you often see is less experienced teachers in some of our most challenged schools and more experienced teachers in some of our more affluent schools. And that doesn't mean that they're better teachers or worse teachers necessarily, but there is, a pretty clear, and it's not just here, we see this everywhere. And so we are, intentional about really trying to encourage our best leaders and teachers to serve in, some of our lower performing schools. And we actually have a program, it's a year-long program that works with leaders, specifically preparing them for, the work in a high need school, because it is different than, what they might experience in a more affluent school. And so we do have that. One of the other things that we're looking for, and if our academic folks were here, they would, talk about the academics, but what we're doing from an operations side is we've been using the same funding formulas for many years here. And surprise, surprise, we're getting similar results year after year. And so we are going to start looking at starting next school year, doing a pilot in one of our clusters that is going to do exactly what you kind of got at there. It's going to increase autonomy for our principals. And so right now, 2 years ago, like I said, we rolled out a reading specialist at every school. Last year it was, math, although not at every single school, but it's always, or traditionally, I should say here, been a one size fits all. And so we're going to look at giving the principals limited, but significantly more autonomy than they currently have to say, you know what, I've got a very experienced teaching staff. I don't need a staff development teacher. I would rather have another counselor to help prepare my kids for college, or another social worker to help my kids through, the pandemic recovery or whatever it is. And along with that will come additionally differentiated resource allocations. So instead of basing it, purely on the number of students, it's going to also look at the student needs. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't speak English as a first language, you're going to need a little extra support. I think people understand that. Special needs students need a little bit of extra support. Students experiencing poverty, come with additional needs. And so basing the funding on enrollment, but also these other demographic things that we know through research impact student learning. And then in addition to that, providing that additional flexibility in empowering our principals, the leaders of our schools, to make some of these budgetary decisions that they believe are best for their unique student body.
That is fantastic. I saw Gordy was cheering in the background and clapping. I think that is awesome. I don't know, Gordy, you have any comments?
Yes, could I step to the foreground for a second?
Yes, please.
We understand that your academic colleagues have engaged consultants to work on this project of evaluating how principals are held accountable, but more importantly, how effectiveness is determined, and specifically with the desire to eliminate the incredible gap in novice principals between higher income schools and lower income schools. Question, is this pilot project that you referred to, Brian, an outcome of that consulting project, or where did this come from?
So it's along the same lines and part of the same, overall efforts that we're making to get some of our highest, most talented staff in front of our neediest students. But it's called student-based budgeting or student allocations, and it's been around for a while. It's mostly in, larger school districts across the country. School districts that have more diversity than Montgomery County has traditionally had. Of course, now we're like the most diverse county in the country, but that's new as of the past, 20, 30 years. And so this is not a new concept, but it is one that, has been shown to increase equity and actually increase transparency as well. It's something we engaged in Nashville. We did not do it in Minneapolis. But saw some really great equity gains and achievement gains in Nashville and again across the country. So it's part of the same work.
Hey, Brian,
Well,
can I add into?
Yeah.
It actually came out of our part of the action plan for our anti-racist audit that we did last year. The student-based budgeting was a suggestion, which is one of the one of the reasons why we're doing this. Also, just to throw in when we're talking about transparency, one of the other suggestions was doing a program budget. If some of you recall, we had stopped doing it somewhere around 2017, so we're going to be going back to that too. Again, just to help our stakeholders kind of get a different look at how we organize our budget rather than kind of the chapter concept that we're currently using now, and the category concept that we do for the state.
Thank you, Bob. This is Gordy Brenny again, and I'm glad you brought that up. The Taxpayers League would dearly love to see the program budget reinvented as a strategic budget with performance targets tied to funding, tied to schedules, and we think that'd be a much more transparent way to do the budget, because it would take into account the base as well as the increment in additional spending. And I want to bring home this question of student-based budgeting. The folks that do strategic planning for you all, we've worked with them, and we've worked with the committee on the board side. They've hit the wall on a district-wide strategic plan. The wall is simply that you cannot effectively manage individual schools at the district level. Principals do that. And that's a good wall. We want to delegate and hold accountable and give performance. So then the question was, school improvement plans become then the centerpiece of implementing all the key strategies related to academic performance. And the key question then when it comes to student budgets is, how do you tie non-formula spending to these school improvement plans? And that's the central question. Thank you.
So it is still, just to be clear, it is still formula spending. It's just based on student and student demographics instead of strictly enrollment. But I think the question is key, because just changing the way that we budget or allocate money is not going to change anything. It's certainly not substantially. It's about the student experience in the classroom and their, the interactions with the teacher and the learning. And we know from research that the number one influence in a student's academic career is the teacher. Number two is the principal. And then there's everything else. And so, making sure that as we give more autonomy, and again, within bounds that will be set by the superintendent in the district, but give them more flexibility, accountability comes along with that, right? And so what they will do is they will build out their school improvement plans before they build their budget. So they'll build out their school improvement plans in the spring, translate that into a budget, which really should just be the school improvement plan in numbers, and then revisit that plan again in, July or August before the school year begins, make any tweaks that they need to make at that point, and then they're off and running. But yes, there will be a tight tie between planning, budgeting, and then results.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So this has been a wonderful, long and very fruitful conversation. I do want to reserve the last few minutes we have, Mr. Hall, to turn over to you to see how can the Montgomery County Taxpayers League and its members and leaders help you as you start your budget season here in December. And I know January, you guys have public comments and testimonies. And as you go through the process through the end of May, how can we help you be successful in advocating for the things that you need for our children?
Great, I appreciate that, and I appreciate everyone being here tonight and being with us past the 8 o'clock hour. But there's limited resources out there. I think we all understand that. I'm of course biased because I dedicate my career to public education. But there, police, fire, human, health and human services. I mean, there are so many competing interests that are all very, very important. And so, not that we want to elbow everyone else out of the room. We already make up almost half of the county's budget. But I think just understanding and helping people understand the importance of education, it is expensive. It's a people business. I think there's a lot of hope before COVID that technology could take on some of that. And we learned that, at least where we're at now, that's not working. And so we remain a people business, and we've got to invest in our teachers so that the best and the brightest want to come to Montgomery County to be our teachers and our leaders for our young people, because they're the future of our economy. They're the futures of our government. And so, just helping people understand the value in the school system, educating someone for a year, as we saw in that one chart, almost $20,000 a year. That's still a lot cheaper than incarcerating someone for a year. And so making sure that we're making those investments in our young people early on, and working together as a community with the police and with human health and human services and the school system to really make sure our young kids who are dealing with things that I never dealt with, that none of us ever dealt with as young people, that they have the supports that they need, whether it's through the system or these other supports that the county provides, so that we remain a wonderful place to raise a family. And so I thank you for the time tonight, and thank you for your support. And, if you have additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And if there's additional information that we find that may be helpful for you all, we'll be sure to share that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, thank you everyone for joining, and hope you have a good evening. Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.